Wouldn't it be cool if there were something that we already do every day, all the time, all day, that if we did it a little bit differently could make a big, huge difference in our lives? Well, guess what? That thing exists. Have you ever noticed that sometimes you're maybe not taking really deep breaths, or you're getting out of breath easily? Does your stomach actually come out when you breathe in? I mean, none of us want our stomachs to come out, do we? Well, breath work is a really cool thing that you can do anytime. So stick around because we're going to learn a ton from our guest today. Welcome to Mind Your Midlife, your go-to resource for confidence and success, one thought at a time. Unlike most advice out there, we believe that simply telling you to believe in yourself or change your habits isn't enough to wake up excited about life or feel truly confident in your body. Each week, you'll gain actionable strategies and, oh my goodness, powerful insights to stop feeling stuck and start loving your midlife. This is the Mind Your Midlife podcast. So if you've listened to episode 1, you heard me talk about a period of life that I went through where I was really struggling to be able to identify the emotions I was feeling at any given moment. I was searching for ways, and I still am always looking for ways to help my clients, searching for ways to make it easier to feel emotions, recognize emotions, because that's how we release emotions and that's how we feel better and heal. And so today, we're going to talk about one of those ways, and that is breath work. We all breathe. So what does it mean, breath work? Well, my guest today, Kamini Wood, is going to tell us exactly what it means, and we'll even try it together. Of course, make sure you're not driving or something like that when we try it. Kamini Wood is a life coach, speaker, author, and host of the Rise Up, Live Joy Your Way podcast. And one of the modalities she uses to work with her clients is breath work. Welcome, Kamini. I'm glad you've joined me.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's going to be a fun conversation. I've been wanting to do an episode about this for a while. So let's dive in. You are a life coach and interestingly work a lot with healthcare workers. So how did you end up finding breath work or including that as part of what you do?
So interestingly enough, it coincides with how I started working with a lot of healthcare workers. So I work with a lot of high achievers. I deal with a lot of anxiety. And so right around the time that I stumbled on breath work was also around the time of COVID, oddly enough. And I started working with a lot of healthcare workers who were dealing with anxiety, the stress, the overwhelm, and the burnout. And it was almost like the universe was bringing the two things together on purpose. So the breath work was really a way to help individuals dealing with things like anxiety, but coming at it from a somatic perspective instead of a cognitive perspective. And I do a lot of work with mindset. It's a majority of the work that I do because it really is when we can shift how we're thinking about things and the stories we're telling ourselves, it's a game changer. But sometimes, especially with those of us who are overthinkers, and I happen to be one of them, sometimes we have to find a different way in. And that's how I stumbled on breathwork because it was a way in using the body as almost like it was a tool to communicate, first of all, because our body's communicating to us, but also it was a release, a deep release of these pent up emotions or these held on to emotions. Once those are released, then you can deal with things from a cognitive perspective. And so with healthcare workers and the whole COVID dynamic that we were dealing with, it was another way in because they were holding on to so much. And it was all suppressed, and breath work allows for that deep release because most often, if you think about, where we hold on to emotions, many people will complain about neck pain and back pain. And usually that's where we're holding on to those emotions. When you do deep breath work, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but that circular belly chest breath, it allows for the ability to start moving that through your system, and all of that can actually be expelled, right? You can actually release it and not hold on to it.
Fascinating. And there's so much I can take from what you just said. So there's a term you used that I think is a really popular term nowadays. And I suspect that people sort of know what it is and maybe not fully, and that's somatic. So can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about what that meant?
Yes, yes, you're right. It's become a more popular word. The somatic, when I'm referring to it, I'm referring to the body's intelligence, right? Using body work as a way to move through things rather than again the cognitive. So not just thinking our way through, but actually recognizing that our body holds on to experiences. Van der Kolk has that book, The Body Keeps the Score, which is an
Hmm.
amazing book. And it really dives into the fact that our body holds on to memories and the experiences we have are somehow held onto our body. So the somatic work allows us to use the body's intelligence. You know, for instance, when I'm talking to somebody who is dealing with a lot of anxiety, a lot of times I will push them to say, okay, where do you feel that? What's the sensation you have in your body? Name the sensation and tell me where it is. Like, where are you holding on to it? Because if you can go into that part of your body, there is so much intelligence being held there versus, again, trying to just think your way through. I am not discounting that cognitive way of working through it at all. I fully believe in it. I do a lot of work with that, but this is a different way to get at that because sometimes we can't access it through the thinking mind. But if we, like, I know as an anxious person, the moment I start feeling those knots in the pit of my stomach and it's like, there's like those, it's almost like the sensation of pins. I immediately, that tells me already like, oh, there's something going on. I'm feeling anxious. Now I can go into it and get curious with it because I'm feeling that first before my brain has even connected that I'm feeling anxious about something.
It's really fascinating because for me, it's in my shoulders. And as you're even saying that, I'm thinking, yeah, I do have a bit of pain in my shoulders. And people always used to tell me, well, put your shoulders down. Why are you hunching up your shoulders? That's why they hurt. Well,
Mhm.
yes and no, right? Like they hurt because I got a whole bunch of stress stored in there.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's so funny you said I think that I carry some in my shoulders too, because people would say, put your shoulders down. I wouldn't even realize that I was doing
Hmm.
this.
Hmm.
And again, once you become aware of it, you then start to recognize you're like, oh, right.
Mm,
Okay. Oh, and then you can get curious, like, what's that about? What's happening there?
right.
I just had some pictures done recently and there were a couple pictures where I noticed my shoulders up and I remembered in the course of what was happening on that day, what was going on when those pictures were taken and it made so much sense where I was like,
Ah,
"Oh, that was when my son called me to tell me he got a speeding ticket." That's right.
that would do it. That would do it. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that because plus, I mean, that's hilarious. But I have 2 kids who are grown, so we had our adventures as well. I think the faster that people recognize in their own body an example of what we're saying, it helps them to see that this is not just theoretical, right?
Yes,
So,
yes, absolutely.
helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we understand somatic. We understand that sometimes just kind of learning how to switch our mindset isn't the only thing because maybe it's really challenging for some
Mhm,
people. So tell us what you actually mean by breath work and what
mhm.
that connection is with emotions.
Yeah, so there are the world of breath work is vast. So let me just say that at the outset, because when we say breath work, it can mean different things to different people. So some people, when they're referring to breath work, they might be referring to more breath exercises like box breathing, right? Because when we're talking about breath work, it can be a very grounding, mindful activity. So it could be something as and I want to say simple, but I'm not using it in a judgment way. It's just
Mhm.
like box breathing is somewhat simple in the sense of you breathe, you breathe in for 4, you hold it for a count of 4, you exhale for 4, wait for 4, and then do it again. And you do it like 4 or 5 times. Within that minute or so, you will find that it'll regulate your system. That's one end of the breath work. Then you go through this whole spectrum of different ideas of breath work. The one that I'm referring to is called it's referring to circular breath work, and it's deep breathing. Because what happens is if you think about how we breathe, a lot of us breathe very shallow. We're breathing like in our chest
Mhm.
and not actually in our diaphragm. And so the breath work that I will do with people is 2 really big breaths in from your belly, right? So it's belly, chest, and then you breathe out all through the mouth. And you just essentially visualize a circle where you're breathing into your belly, then your chest, and then you're breathing out. And the reason why you do this in the breath work that I do with people ranges from 20 to 29 minutes, right? So you're doing it for a consistent amount of time. The reason why most people say that this is life-changing is because as you get into it and you're in this rhythm and you're breathing all of that out, all of those emotions that you have been storing in kind of like the pit of your stomach essentially come up and out. I've led breathwork classes. I have participated in breathwork classes. I have yet to go to one class holding it or as a participant and not either had my own tears or witnessed other people having tears. And it's because the emotions finally have that ability to come up and out and be expressed. And they're the emotions that we've been holding on to. And why it's so important is most of us are tamping down our emotions pretty much since we're little, right? Because if we think about it, we receive messages as little kids, like we'll be crying and we'll receive a very innocent message of, you're brave, don't cry, or, we don't have time for that right now. We've got to get going, right? So we're receiving these little tiny messages of how we don't have time for our emotions, or, that emotion's not okay because we're actually brave, or, anger is not a good emotion. So nope, you can't express that. And so we're taught very early on to just push them down, push them down. And so breath work allows for them to actually come up and out, because ultimately, and I'm a firm believer in this now, that emotions do need to be processed and they need to be acknowledged, because at the end of the day, there really isn't a good emotion or a bad emotion. It's just data. The emotions that we're feeling are giving us information on something we need that we're not getting, or a value that's not being met. And if we could just allow ourselves to come at our emotions without judgment and just look at it as data and information, it would allow us to be able to move through so much more, right? Whether it's a challenging moment or even just being really present in our happy, joyful moments, because we're allowing the emotions to actually be there.
Great points. Great points. And I will say, listeners, I went through some counseling many years ago, actually, about this, because I couldn't recognize my emotions at all. And so if you're listening to what Kamini was just saying, and if I asked you, what is the emotion you're feeling right now, and you couldn't put a word to that, that's a sign that maybe there's some work to be done there, because I couldn't do that. I couldn't name how I was feeling at all. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And even in the work that I do, most of my clients really struggle with it, or they'll be able to name maybe the more common emotion, like, oh, I feel sad.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And what else? Right. Because underneath the sadness are other emotions, or even I feel angry. Okay, great. Underneath that, what's there? Because oftentimes the anger is that top level emotion, and there's probably either some sadness or some loneliness or some frustration. Something else is underneath there. And it is so important for us to be able to name those emotions.
Absolutely. So, how is it, do you think, that this habit of breathing better or differently in a circular way is so connected to emotions? Can you put that into words necessarily?
Well, if you think about breath itself, right, it's a life force. It is our life force. And so when we allow for the breath to actually, I almost visualize, the visualization that comes to me as I'm doing the work is almost like cleansing. Can I open up, like when you're breathing through a straw and you like, let's say something gets stuck in the straw and you breathe through it and you clear it. That's the visualization that comes up for me. And I know it's a very strange thing to think about, but it's almost like we're clearing the pathway for those emotions to now be like, oh, this is what I've been feeling for the last bit. I mean, again, as an anxious person, I know, having been trained in breath work, that I now, once I feel those knots in the pit of my stomach, I take a moment to breathe really deeply, where I'm like, oh, let me fill my belly with some breath and let me let it out through my mouth. And I'll do it for a couple minutes, which just allows for, one, the regulation to happen, right? My nervous system regulates. But two, I'm able to more accurately name what's coming up for me. What am I actually feeling? So it's not even that once you've done breath work, it's not that you have to sit there and it only works for 20 to 29 minutes. It's now my body is familiar with it. Again, body holds intelligence, right? Now you can tap into that when you only have 2 or 3 minutes. I can sit there and be like, whew, okay, what's going on here? And it allows for that clearing to happen. And then I'm able to name, oh, it's not just anxiety. I'm feeling, really sad about, let me fill in the blanks, right? Or I'm feeling nervous about, maybe my children are involved in something and I'm nervous about how that's going to, having emerging adults is its own, its own fear, right? But In some sense, you were asking like, how do they correlate? And I think it really is the breath as a life force also then clears the way for these emotions to be processed.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And now we're going to flip it because I feel like it's possible that there might be people listening and thinking, well, that's all well and good, but I don't want to feel my bad
Yes.
emotions.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
maybe breathing is great, but I don't want to be
Uh-huh.
sad. I don't want to feel the bad
Yes.
stuff. So what do you
Yeah.
say if somebody's thinking that?
Yes, I first of all, I hear you, totally hear you, and totally get it. And also, it's part of the human experience. And when we feel our emotions, it's again looking at them not as good or bad, but recognizing that that discomfort is showing up to tell you that there's a value you have or a need you have. And if you can name that, then you can take values based action. So it's not about feeling the sadness to stay stuck in it. It's about letting the sadness be there, let it communicate to you so you can move through it and you can get to the other side of it.
And I heard a coach once say, I don't know if I'm going to quote her exactly correctly, but something like a negative emotion has never killed anyone. Like you're going to get through it. Nobody's going to die. It's all going to be okay.
Right, right, right. Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? Discomfort is part of the human experience. And so, and I know it's been human nature. We want to avoid that because who wants to be uncomfortable? And also, we're not denying our own ability to actually fully live at the same time, right? We can't have love without grief. And the reason why is because they coexist. Like we know love, we know we loved somebody, or we know the feeling of love basically because we have the ability to what we're going to grieve. It's hard to accept that, but it's the yin and yang, right? It's the natural law of polarity. We have both and we can learn from both.
Yeah, and I like the idea that if we can get through it, it gets better. We just let it out and then it's better. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because if you think about when we suppress it, we think for the short amount of time, we're like, oh, okay, we don't have to deal with it. Eventually it's going to come out. Like we can only suppress things for so long. And some of us are super good at it. We will do it for 20, 30 years. So we're really good at it, but eventually it's going to find its way out because at the end of the day, it's a path that we're being offered so we can grow, learn about ourselves and evolve.
I love it. Okay. So then you told us very briefly what this idea of circular breath was, but can you either just walk us through it or explain it further or can we try it as an example?
So for most of the breath work, you're lying down. So
Mhm.
essentially, though, worry that most of us females and some males too, we always are told like suck in your stomach. We're going to do
Mhm.
the opposite of that, where you're actually breathing into your belly, kind of pushing it out, and then you breathe into your chest, and then you let it out through your mouth. So it's really a
And I can feel stomach and then chest. I wasn't sure I'd be able to feel that. I
yeah.
do feel the
Yeah.
difference.
And as you're laying down, if you actually have a hand on both your chest and your stomach, so you're actually trying to push your hand in both areas. It's a way to do like that touch point of like, oh yeah, I'm breathing into both. But essentially you're breathing in, you're pushing out your belly, then you're breathing into your chest. So your chest is coming up and then you're out through your mouth. The one caveat I'll say is that when you do this work, if you do it too quickly, you can cause your hands to somewhat, it's called tetany, and they'll almost feel like they're tensing up and they're like having a spasm. You're going to be fine, first of all,
Okay.
but really it just means you just kind of slow it down a little bit, right?
Ah.
Which is why the breathwork classes are it's great to participate in a breathwork class to get going because it can be a little
Mhm.
unnerving that first time you do it. Because most of us are also breathing through our nose. So this is the opposite of that because you're actually breathing through your mouth. But again, it's called circular because it's, belly, chest, out the mouth, belly, chest, out the mouth. So if you're thinking of a visual, you're kind of going around and around. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And we can't sit here on a podcast and just breathe because that's not really very good entertainment. But I tried it a few times. I definitely felt it. Listeners, maybe pause and try it, but I definitely felt it. So, too fast is not good. I heard you say that. what about just kind of slow, deep breaths? If somebody just was having a rough day and they wanted to take a few deep breaths to help themselves calm down, is this something they could do?
Totally. And as I said, I mentioned, that's what I do now,
Mhm.
where if I'm having either an anxious day or I'm feeling overwhelmed, you can absolutely just take a pause, take a time out, and give yourself 1 or 2 minutes of just do that deep breath. And you can do that circular breath of belly, chest out, and do that for, again, 1 or 2 minutes. And you'll find that your nervous system will start to regulate. Because if we think about just our sympathetic and our parasympathetic nervous system, doing that methodical circular breathing will allow us to re-regulate, and it's a way to re-regulate with our own self, right? Because sometimes it's helpful to co-regulate with somebody else, but this is a way to do it on your own, because we don't always have somebody we can sit with and co-regulate with, especially if we're in the middle of our workday, for instance. And let's just say because a lot of my clients will have very stressful meetings, and then they're just
Mhm.
they need a way, they need a go-to, and it's just, you can do it in the bathroom, you can do it at your desk, all you need is 1 or 2 minutes of just giving yourself time to breathe. And again, remember, breath is a life force. So it's a very natural way to reconnect with self.
So I love the idea of a tool that is fairly simple, that once we learn how to do it, we can use it anytime, and it's free and it takes a minute. And I definitely hear you, though, that to start something like this, you would want to work with a coach, or you said a class. So how can people connect with you and learn more about what you do? Or do you have other ideas about how we can find a breathwork class or something like that?
Well, there are so many individuals at this point that do offer breathwork classes, which are amazing. They're all amazing individuals. For me personally, I do work with people on breathwork. And so if they want to connect with me, my website is kaminiwood.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook with the handle It's Authentic Me. So definitely feel free to check out all of that. I do have some blog articles on my website as well of just mindfulness, breath work, and why it's so important as a way. Again, it's the somatic way to start working through some of what we're dealing with in terms of not just emotions, but things like even burnout. Breath work can be really helpful with something like burnout, because again, you're re-regulating your nervous system, you're allowing yourself to process through some of the stuck emotions, and then you're able to work through it from a cognitive perspective.
I love it, because we do get stuck, especially if our nervous system is all riled up, or for somebody that doesn't speak nervous system, because we're just really, really stressed and we feel
Yes.
like we can't get out of it. So this is a
Yep.
way to
Yes.
start that
Yes.
process.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to your point, right, with people who don't speak nervous system, it's when you feel like you are so tense all the time, or you can't figure out, your brain is constantly running. There's never like an off moment. That would be an indication that you're holding on to a lot of stuff. Maybe breath work might be an opportunity to actually, first of all, slow down, and second of all, reconnect with self, and then third, release what it is that you're carrying.
Awesome. And listeners, I will put Kamini's website and social media in the show notes, so go and have a look for sure. Okay, so as we wrap up then, what would you say is kind of the one key, most important thing that
Mhm.
somebody listening should remember from this?
Can I give you two?
I guess.
One, let's stop running away from our emotions. Let's
Mm,
actually see if we can be brave and go towards them. And two, breathing, like really breathing, is such a game changer. When you give yourself permission to actually pay attention to how you're breathing and to breathe consciously, it can shift just tremendously from, like, you can go from over anxious, overstimulated to calm and connected within moments.
I love it. And it's not an extra thing. We breathe anyway.
Exactly. You don't have to find more time in your day.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. I will remember these as well, because I've been curious about breath work for a while. So, Kamini, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Listeners, you got 2 OMG moments today. Thank you for that, Kamini. I loved both. Stop running from our emotions, and breathing is a game changer. So pay attention. If you want to take the next step in healing your thought emotion cycle, make sure you go to cherylpfisher.com/story cycle for that free guide. And of course, kaminiwood.com to find out more about the breathwork we talked about today. And if you are loving this show, Mind Your Midlife, and you are listening on Apple, scroll down in your app right now, leave a rating and a review. It makes such a huge difference in allowing more people to see this show. Now, make sure also that you have hit the follow button, because my next episode is going to be a coaching episode. So I am talking with a real life coaching client, and we are talking about a situation where, maybe we're avoiding confrontation. What should we do? You will get to walk alongside her as we do a life coaching session. Can't wait to see you there. Oh my goodness, let's keep creating confidence and success, one thought at a time.